It's no longer about who is the smartest in the room, but who can manage their emotions the most effectively to either be an individual contributor or leader of an organization. That human intelligence is one of the most sought after skills that organizations need in order to progress and propel and to increase their market share. That human connection is going to be so vital, even as we continue to invest in AI.
Welcome to the Hiring Excellence Podcast. I'm Johnny Campbell, and today we're flipping a familiar phrase. Instead of artificial intelligence and human resources, we're talking human intelligence and artificial resources. How technology should support, not replace, the human connection in hiring. I'm joined by Paul Hamilton, who leads talent acquisition strategy at KPMG in Canada. We've been working together for the last while on KPMG's Recruiter Academy, and Paul has a front row view of how companies can and should be balancing human judgment with automation in hiring. We're going to explore why a human-first mindset matters more than ever, where technology fits best, and what the future of hiring looks like in a world of powerful AI tools. Paul, you're very welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on the show. Perhaps you can give an introduction to you, your career. Tell us where that beautiful skyline is behind you and why this topic matters so much to you.
Johnny, I've been a fan of yours for many years. You know that. And this podcast, especially, I think your topics are so relevant and so important in today's day and age. And I'm honored to be able to contribute to the conversation, specifically around talent. I am here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the city behind me. It is a gorgeous morning out here. And I always enjoy being able to sit down and talk talent with like-minded individuals. You know, being in the profession for 20 some odd years, I've had opportunities to really share knowledge and gain knowledge and wisdom from thought leaders such as yourselves and others in this space. And in particular, in today's day and age, as we think about the impact of AI, this conversation needs to be elevated. It's so critical. It's so important. And I'm delighted that we're sitting down and having this conversation today.
So, Paul, maybe before we dive into the topic, tell me a little bit about your career. So, you weren't always in KPMG Canada. So tell me about some of the businesses you've worked in, some of the kind of structures you've seen, some of the challenges you've had in recruiting over the last few years. And we've known each other quite some time, since probably my first time in Canada, gosh, coming up on 15 years ago. So tell us about maybe some of the rich background you have beyond obviously just professional services.
You know, it's interesting. I actually started off in financial services. I actually worked as a trader, and I enjoyed my time there. But the common denominator that people saw in me was my ability to build relationships and cultivate meaningful sort of partnerships with organizations and individuals. And that led me to a career in HR. So I pivoted. And ever since I joined both on the agency side and then moved into corporate, I worked at organizations such as, Indigo, Microsoft for many years, leading their global TA practice. I spent some time with one of our largest financial institutions, BMO or Bank of Montreal. I worked for an organization called, several healthcare organizations. But the key piece for me was staying in talent. It was always about recruiting. It was always about enabling organizations to hire better, to manage the employment branding and the attraction features, understanding the employee value proposition, and really becoming an organization that was well thought of, and then attracting the right talent, the best talent. So talent attraction, recruitment it's in my blood, it's my DNA, it's what I do. And over the last 20 years, working at exceptional organizations, understanding that this is the most important commodity any organization can have. It's the people. And as someone who was sitting in at the front door, I always want to make sure that we have a really good welcome mat to ensure that we bring in the right talent. So that's why I'm here. I think, even as we talk about AI, the need for talent acquisition may pivot, the need for talent acquisition may pivot, but it's not going anywhere.
I love that. A concept I'm always reminded of is that companies aren't real. They're made up concepts by humans, and the humans in those companies band together with the same purpose, and that's what makes a company, right? So when we're thinking about hiring, we think about businesses, organizations. They're just collections of people. I say just they're collections of people, which makes them powerful, right? Which makes, I think, talent, as you say, the most important thing. So tell me about these two concepts. What does human intelligence and artificial resources? Note that's mixed up. Human intelligence, artificial resources. What do each of those concepts mean to you?
When AI was first introduced, is a fantastic ideology around, how do we leverage, whether it's, RPAs or agentic AI. It's all about how do we augment what the humans are doing. And I think a part of me feels as though we become somewhat lazy and we become so dependent on the AI advent that we're sort of missing out on what's the most important aspect of it, which is the human intelligence. And quite frankly, there was this really good report from the World Economic Forum in 2025. It was the Future of Jobs report. And what they've said is that analytical thinking remains the most sought after core skill amongst employers, with 7 out of 10 companies considering it an essential, followed closely by things such as resilience, flexibility, agility, and along with leadership and social influence. Those items are not going to be replaced by AI. And I think it's so important that we now double down on improving our human capabilities to supplement what we're bringing in from an AI perspective. So we can't lose sight of the human intelligence. And in fact, it's the AI that's going to augment the work that we are doing today. So AI is really going to support us. It's not going to replace us.
Why do you think that human first mindset is so particularly important in talent and talent acquisition, Paul?
My partner is a psychologist, and we have these rich conversations around, what do organizations need to be successful? What's the secret ingredient? And as you said off the top, it is really the humans that drive the organization's success. So think
Hmm.
about understanding people at work. It's all about how they think, how they feel, how they behave, how they lead, how we work together, how we use that understanding to improve both the human well being and the organizational effectiveness. That to me is the most important aspect of any company that you work for, because these are what I consider to be the key areas, such as leadership development, team dynamics, and communication. If we lose sight of those elements, then the culture, the fabric, the DNA of the company erodes. So that is why it's so important that we continue to invest in that human aspect of it, because it's the people that drive the bus.
What happens if we go too far the other way? What happens, or what has happened, or what would happen, do you think, if an organization said, I'm going to take the opposite view of Paul, the contrary view, and say, I'm going to double down on automation wherever I can, AI everywhere? What does that look like from a talent acquisition point of view? And why is it negative? What are the problems with it?
Well, I think there's three. Number one is the ability to have that judgment and critical thinking, right? I think AI is going to be able to analyze an incredible amount of data quickly, but it's going to summarize. We still need that human in the loop to make those decisions on talent, because there's still a lot of gray area, and there will always be gray area that we need to decipher as we think about understanding who is the right person for this organization. There's discernment, there's judgment, there's critical thinking that needs to be applied. So the first one is that the final decision still needs to be made with humans in the loop. The second piece is there is a strong ethical component that I think oftentimes we sort of miss out on. Ethical component in terms of responding to what's happening both from a societal perspective, understanding on macroeconomics in terms of how that might impact your organization. And then, of course, the ethical dilemma of things that we're seeing in today's day, whether it's geopolitical. The ethical component cannot be lost in all of the things that are happening in today's day and age. If we don't have that human component, then again, the ethical component gets compromised. I think the third piece is we have to understand the regulatory body that's governing how AI is being used. In certain countries and certain practices, they are minimizing how AI is going to play a role within the organization. We can't allow it to take over in the sense of have it unregulated, because once you open up Pandora's box, it's going to be very difficult to close. So there has to be some proper guardrails in how we actually use AI to create some efficiencies, to help us improve productivity, but not compromise what an organization is trying to achieve. So those three elements, I think, are vital in terms of understanding the sandbox in which we're going to coexist. This isn't about human intelligence or artificial or augmented resources. It's human intelligence and artificial resources. We have to coexist, play nicely in the sandbox, and make sure that we are supporting each other in terms of the evolution of where we're going from an organizational perspective, from a cultural perspective, and in most cases, in terms of where the company and where the future of jobs are going as well.
So, Paul, you mentioned you started your career as a trader. You ran talent acquisition at BMO, and so you've had a fair bit of exposure to financial services in your career. I'd love you to respond to an analogy that was shared with us recently on the podcast by Barb Hyman, who's a CEO of an organization called Sapia.ai, which is big into ethical AI and usage of the tools, and has technology helping organizations do that. And Barb shared a story where she kind of analogized recruiting and banking, particularly the applying for a loan, the process of applying for a loan. And she basically used the concept of risk to frame this. And she said, hiring is about risk, and giving out a loan is also about risk management of both areas. So you're trying to navigate through that risk. And she gave an analogy of giving out a loan, and said, like, a loan is not decided anymore by meeting a person, having a big conversation with them for an hour, bringing 3 or 4 tellers in to have a second opinion, waiting 6 weeks and telling the person if they get a loan. We use data, we use science, we use analytics, and often can give a loan approval to an organization or a person in 60 seconds. And actually that's done deliberately to reduce risk. And the analogy was then to apply to obviously recruiting, to say, why are we still doing it the old-fashioned way? And actually, isn't this a better way? So within the ethics framework, within the regulatory framework, how would you respond to that analogy? Does it work nicely? Then, if we're doing it for loan applications, we absolutely should start doing this for hiring? Or do you think there's more nuance to it?
I absolutely think there's more nuance to it. And in fact, if all things were created equal, then I think that's where that analogy and application makes sense. But we know we live in a day and age where it's not. So, for example, you might have someone that is currently in a low income situation. They might be from a marginalized community, and they complete that application. And chances are they may not have the same sort of score as someone who is from upper middle class. Hence the reason why it's imperative that we have that judgment factor built into it. So I understand the application process should absolutely be, driven by automation. I absolutely agree that the assessment should be driven by automation. So you look at all the data points that come into it, but then you look at the things surrounding that individual, their circumstances. Is it fair to make a decision based purely on what is in a system? Or should you be able to look that person in the whites of their eyes and have a conversation to understand the story around what their financial situation is? Because if it really comes down to that analogy, then I think we're in a world of hurt, because there's going to be some people that are more advantaged, and clearly there's going to be some folks that are disadvantaged. So that's where that analogy, it's amazing in terms of the efficiencies that are gained, but in terms of the equality that's driven out of that, that's where there's some challenges there. And I think about another example might be, for example, food services. We know that one of the fastest growing areas in terms of where AI will not be displacing people is in farming and the ability to provide food on table. In that scenario, it's important that we look across the board and ensure that there's an equitable opportunity for folks to be able to gain some financial support in order to cultivate the lands that they live on or cultivate the farming area. So at the end of the day, I agree that there is a symbiotic relationship, if you will, between technology, but that human judgment still needs to be part of the decision making process at the end of the day.
It makes me think, Paul, in terms of, and what scares me, keeps you awake at night about these things, is that, you know, no person is perfect in terms of their decision making, which is the current way we do hiring. We have a bunch of individuals and we have some data, a bunch of individuals to make a decision. But the danger of AI making the decision to me is that if one provider, becomes the main software that everybody uses, let's say 30% of the market uses, or 40% of hiring goes through this big vendor that everyone uses. It's like one hiring manager making the decisions for 40% of the world's hires. That might be a great hiring manager, but there's just no difference there. It's the same algorithm. And if there's anything wrong with that algorithm in the slightest, the impact is enormous. Where humans are flawed, but if we make bad decisions, it typically impacts a smaller number of people. And in fact, we're probably part of a hiring committee. There's other voices brought in. In fact, good hiring processes bring lots of these data points in. So I think, using that risk analogy, the risk is just so much higher. The stakes are higher. So when we think about the human skills, Paul, when you think about recruiters in particular, what human skills do you think are the most critical for recruiters? And what are you looking at investing in for your team? And what would you recommend for other teams looking to kind of build for that future where AI does help us, but the recruiter's role is going to be perhaps more evolved?
Yeah, and let me start by talking about the AI piece, and then I'll come back to the human sort of integration. I see there's two sandboxes or two important pillars. And if I think about the AI piece, obviously, data analytics, machine learning is going to be really critical. Automation oversight, again, prompt engineering, and program languages from an AI, from an AI literacy and tool proficiency will be very important. But here's where the human piece comes in. And if I think about human skills integration, in particular with regards to recruitment and talent acquisition, and even broader from a talent management perspective, there's six skills or attributes that will not be replaced. And in fact, when I talk about human intelligence, these are the areas that we need to double down in. So the first one is critical thinking and problem solving, right? Not everything is black and white. And in fact, when it comes to managing the workforce, it's only going to become more complex as we evolve with multi-generations, with aging populations, with new demographics coming into the workforce. So that critical thinking and problem solving piece is going to be pivotal as we evolve in our recruiting and talent acquisition or talent attraction practices. Second one is critical review. You know, we need to be able to discern between a good applicant and a great applicant. And that is going to be supplemented and augmented by the use of AI. But at the end of the day, we know the culture. We understand the fabric of how this organization works. Therefore, that human in the loop will play an important role in that critical review of talent. And not only talent today, but how will that talent evolve and grow and add value back to the organization. The third one, which I actually think is the most important piece, is the human intelligence. It's no longer about who is the smartest in the room, but who can manage their emotions the most effectively to either be an individual contributor or leader of an organization. That human intelligence is one of the most sought after skills that organizations need in order to progress and propel and to increase their market share. That human connection is going to be so vital, even as we continue to invest in AI. Creative thinking. My son is in the music industry. It will be a shame if we allow AI to create the arts, and the music and the painting. That is all driven by human emotion. So that creative thinking in terms of how we brand our organization, how we go to market and tell people about our value proposition, that is going to be pivotal as we evolve, and we become more competitive. And then, of course, I mentioned this earlier, but that ethical judgment, Johnny, I can't understate how important it is, especially in the world of inclusion, diversity, and equity. We need that ethical judgment component. And then finally, adaptability. We have to understand that being able to pivot is a skill that every single employee in an organization will need to exercise because things are moving at such a rapid pace right now. The clip of change is exponential, and we haven't seen anything like this before. So, the ability to adapt, those are the human skills from an integration perspective that will allow us to coexist and co collaborate and co build in this world of AI. Those are the skills that I think are going to be essential as we move forward.
I love those six. And if I go back to the start, um, one thing that really struck me, I've had colleagues over the years and I've had friends over the years who know a lot of stuff. They're quite academic, they read extensively. I'm sure you have these friends as well, perhaps colleagues, and they end up reading extensively or listening to podcasts or watching documentaries on topics that they've never actually lived in or worked in. But all of a sudden, they speak as experts. And it's hard to know that they're not experts because they sound very plausible. But then you come across somebody who's actually lived that, done that thing, whatever that thing might be, worked in that profession, lived in that country, had that circumstance. And it's just different. And it strikes me that AI will have all the intelligence, it will have read all the articles, read all the books, watched all the videos, but never done it. And we can see that in real life that it's different. The easiest one is when people who perhaps aren't parents talk to you about parenting because they've read about parenting, they've hung out with parents, and you just kind of have to be a parent. Just like somebody who's lived abroad, or somebody perhaps who grew up alone with no siblings, or somebody who was fostered, and you try and relate your experience, but you can't ever really fully get to that unless you've done that. I think there's something we forget when we think about super intelligent AI that has consumed all the information. It isn't human. It hasn't done the thing. And so therefore, who do you want making this decision? I think is a really good point. And you're talking about, your human intelligence, creative thinking. You mentioned your sons in the music industry. We've talked about this before, I think, Paul, but the best artists typically produce their best work in their early 20s, or if they go through a divorce or they have some major loss, because often the pain or the newness of something is where you get the most beautiful art. Um, AI can read about that, but it's not going to be the same as actually doing it. So I love that six. Um, if you transfer that then across to recruiting, if that's what you're double downing on for the human skills, where do you think AI has a place, like automation? Because I think one of the challenges is that it's hard to leverage those skills if you're managing 40 recs with a poor ATS and horrible workflows and a bad career site, et cetera, et cetera. So talk to me about the opportunity for the artificial resources in this.
I will. So, great question, first and foremost. And I'm going to start by thinking about it from a psychological perspective. One of the biggest concerns that I have with AI is, there's the idea that it's going to take away some work, which I believe it will. It will absolutely take away probably about 20 to 25%. I've read some data where it's upwards of about 39%. But what most organizations are going to do is going to add on to that person's portfolio or that plate. So now we're at a dangerous position or a dangerous inflection point where something called burnout or mental health comes into play. And that psychological factor is detrimental to the health of an organization. So, where I think AI can play a pivotal role is being able to assess workload, being able to assess, does this person have capacity to do things like take a break? Does this person
No.
have the ability to manage their work in such a meaningful way that they're not compromising on productivity, but they're also in a position where they can look after their mental health and their well-being? I also think it's going to create some efficiencies in the system. We think about some of the, you and I spent some time recently in the United States where we look at, where there are specific areas within talent acquisition practice where we can absolutely leverage AI to get rid of some of those non-value work so that we can focus in the upper quadrant and provide more of that strategic consultative relationship building, the things that add value back to the organization, both in terms of, cultivating relationships with top talent, building and bridging those, and then also understanding business more effectively because we can speak as ambassadors and evangelists of the organization. So there's tremendous opportunities to eliminate some of that low value work through AI. And it also help us to, craft great messages to attract talent using the AI, whether it's agentic AI or leveraging, some agents to really help us minimize some of the transactional work that we spend a lot of time on. But ultimately, I really would like to see AI, we always talk about this, help us evaluate what the good quality of hire looks like. Help us to evaluate and ensure that the work distribution is balanced so that I can still get an optimized productivity out of my employees. Help us to really understand the mindset of the candidate from a psychological perspective so that we can better target our messaging to, draw them in and have those conversations with them. Help us to understand what are the key words that will help to attract and entice that candidate to come to our organization. Help us to differentiate between my company and company X, Y, and Z, and really understand what's the value proposition we bring. So those to me are things that I think AI will play a pivotal role in. And of course, the data component. I want to be able to throw in unstructured data into the system, help me to discern what is this data telling me and what does my business leader need to know about this data so that we can make some principled decisions around our talent, whether it's workforce planning, whether it's resource management. There's some rich applications that we can assess and analyze data so much quicker than ever before to help us get to the bottom line and make some decisions and then go.
So, Paul, you remind me of a podcast I listened to recently with Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz. And Mark Andreessen is one of the most famous Silicon Valley VCs. He's invested early, one of the founders of PayPal with Elon Musk. Well, we won't hold that against him. And he spoke about sectors and industries that Andreessen Horowitz invest in. And Mark shared this idea. He's this view on sectors. He said most sectors end up following this kind of a barbell or dumbbell graph, in terms of handheld weight for anyone not familiar with the concept, which would have a very thin middle that's long and big fat ends, right, in terms of your barbell. And he said the analogy would be, let's say you take retail. He said either you have the thin funnel, the thin middle, which would be, let's say, Amazon, which is unbelievable automation, digitization purely. Or you have on the other end, high-end luxe shopping, where you have this kind of concierge experience for anyone's ever bought an expensive handbag or expensive coat. I'm not usually in that category, but where you have like this, you line up and you have a velvet rope and you wait and you get taken around the store and you spend thousands on this kind of product. And his concept is that nearly every sector ends up, taking that shape where there's only room for people at the extreme ends, unbelievable automation or unbelievable high touch. And if you're in the middle, it's kind of a disaster. When you think about talent acquisition, do you think maybe that could follow TA, that there's room maybe in, let's say, hourly or volume hiring for unbelievable automation? And then the only other option, if you're going to win, is going to be really doubling down on personalization at the other end of the extreme. Does that work for you? Because I felt there was some resonance in TA in terms of thinking about AI and having those two opposites and saying, basically in the middle, if you're doing a bit of both, and you're only doing a bit of AI and a bit of personalization, you're kind of dead in terms of competitiveness.
Wholeheartedly agree with that approach. First of all, we are now living in a society where this idea of one size fits all is no longer applicable. In fact, that needs to be, out the window. We really need to understand segmentation, whether it's your candidates, whether it's your hiring managers, whether it's understanding the critical positions that drive your organization forward. And as such, based on the segmentation, that's how you determine what is the right recruitment strategy that's going to get you to the finish line. So, to that example, there will be roles that require that high touch because the supply of talent is very thin. There's a finite number of X people that have that skill set. In order to really get those individuals into the pipeline, it's not going to be, put out an AI bot that's going to source the market and then invite them in. They don't have time. They're super busy. You need to pick up the phone and do it the old fashioned way. And that's where that high touch premium service comes in. It's like, like you said, if you're going to go buy a Rolex, you are going to go into a Rolex authorized store and purchase that Rolex because you want to understand the tactile look and feel. How does it feel on your hand? Does it match your sort of persona? That's a different shopping experience. That's a different recruiting experience than, we've got thousands of positions. Maybe it's customer service, for example, or maybe it's your frontline retail store clerk or something along those lines, where there's an ample amount of candidates where you can absolutely use automation, not only to attract, but also to do the assessment, to potentially stack rank candidates, and even help with the interviewing, the assessment, the screening, and maybe even the decision making. So there's different extremes that require a different level of recruitment support, and which is why I love the space that we're in today, because we offer tailored solutions, we offer customized solutions, we offer middle of the road solutions, and we offer the one-to-many solution that organizations need. So the one size fits all approach is no longer applicable, but through the use of AI and other applications, we can really configure and create a bespoke model to fit the needs of the organizations and the segments that we talked about earlier, whether it's a high touch environment or, the masses. You can build a recruitment solution for that.
Paul, I'm going to ask you two final questions. The first, I think, is going to be reasonably easy to answer, but I'm sorry that the last one's probably going to be difficult because it's kind of $1 million question at the moment. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have a simple, easy answer. Question one, though. Let's fast forward X years. Let's say 5. 5 seems like a reasonable amount of years to fast forward. What does TA/talent look like in 5 years, or maybe it's 4, maybe it's 7, far enough in the future that we're already there and most people are already there? At a high level, what do you think that looks like to you, Paul?
I think there's going to be 3 things that will define talent attraction in the future. The first one is recruiters are truly going to be talent acquisition advisors. They're going to consult with the business in a more strategic way than ever before, because we're going to reduce the transactional administrative stuff will allow us to have more time to engage with the business. We really will become partners, or as our good friend Johnny would say, or John V would say, talent advisors 2.0, 3.0. It's going to be a high relational based model that we have not seen the likes of today. There's some organizations that are doing it sporadically, but I think it's going to become the norm, where we offer this incredible value add where we do more than just talent attraction. It becomes more of a talent management, resource management, talent advisor role to the business. So that's the first one. The second piece is our understanding of our markets will be deeper, richer, because we have more access to data and we can analyze the data. We can understand the trending factors that are in play that oftentimes eludes us in today's market. So in a nutshell, we're going to be smarter.
Mm,
And part of that intelligence is that human intelligence that I spoke of at the very onset of this conversation. It's the human intelligence that's going to allow us to be better partners to the business. And then the third piece is it's going to be ultra competitive. So, yes, we sit for the most part in the HR space, but I think through the use of technology, it's going to become more of a sales and marketing function. And we may even see TA branch off and out of HR and more aligned with sales and marketing because the competitive landscape is going to be something unlike we have seen in previous years. So I think those are three off the top. We're going to leverage technology. It's going to underpin all of the above, but we are going to be better partners. We're going to be smarter, and we're going to be fierce at sales and marketing in order to get the right talent in the door.
I love that, Paul. And, only this week I've been really noodling on the analogies or the parallels, I should say, between revenue organizations, sales, marketing, customer support organizations, and TA. Because really, we've always followed sales and or marketing in terms of we've got funnels. We look at marketing is more top of funnel, sales is more mid to bottom funnel. And often we follow what they have done. We took their CRMs, we took their marketing approaches, their branding approaches, we brought it into TA. So often I think when you want to look to the future of TA, just look at revenue organizations, you'll probably get a glimpse of where we're going. But it brings me to my final question, the second question I mentioned, which I think maybe is, I know for me, the harder one, and for most people I talk to, the harder one. How do we get there? And I want you to perhaps think of this in the context of leaders listening who are running recruiting teams, big and small, and they agree with you. They're like, totally get it. High five, Paul. This advisory model with better intelligence, more sales and marketing oriented. I see that in the future. So I can see where I am. I can see the future, but I just can't navigate through the how do you get there? How are you thinking about how you get there? How we transform into this new TA organization? And what advice would you give to our listeners?
Well, I would say there are a couple of things. Number one, trial and error. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. There are going to be several bumps in this road. This is new terrain for all of us. And as someone who's working out of a professional services firm, we are going to require expertise and collaboration with other parts of the business. This is no longer just a HR go at it alone. We're going to have to collaborate with strong project management, change management capabilities. Our finance department will play an integral role in how we get there. Our strategy teams will have to help us navigate this messy terrain as we continue to learn and as we continue to adapt and pivot to the changes that are in front of us. So, it's going to be messy, it's going to be bumpy, and we can't do it alone. But trial and error will help us to get there. I also believe something my old boss at Microsoft always reinforced is that when the tide rises, all boats float. And to me, that means I'm not going to sit here in my KPMG office working with my KPMG recruitment team and try to figure this out. I'm going to reach across all different organizations, all different sort of TA practices, have conversations with you, Johnny, and other people to understand what are you doing that we can learn from. This is really about building a shared sort of community of practice so that we can all evolve and grow together. I'm not looking at it from a competitive landscape. I'm looking at it from how do we collectively increase our profession by helping us get there. And then the final piece is really about conversations. It's about understanding what good looks like, understanding what other parts of the business have already crossed the bridge and are already on that path, and engaging with them to apply lessons learned, to understand some of the landmines that they need to avoid. So this is going to create a massive ecosystem as we all collectively learn together. So the first thing is just start wherever you are. I mean, we're all at different maturation stages, which is fine, but you got to put that first foot forward and start. Number two, it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes as long as we continue to learn from those mistakes. we're going to continue to evolve and create new frameworks, new models, which will allow us to get there. And I think two other things. The journey is more important than the destination. I really, truly believe that. Just that journey of how we get there. It's not about the end goal. It's about, making sure that as we are evolving, we're bringing others along. And then the best part for me is have fun while we're doing this. We have never seen a transformation in TA like this for, well, as long as I've been in the game. So this is something where we're all going to look back at some point and say, we did it. But while we're doing it, it's going to be hard. So it's important that we understand what success looks like. And more importantly, let's have fun doing it, because this is a game changer. This truly is a game changer.
Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure to sit down and spend some time with you, to hear your thoughts, to share them with our audience in the spirit of your philosophy on how we get there. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next chat, Paul.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you for having me, and wishing you continued success. And I look forward to the next call or the next podcast that you have, because I gleaned so much information from your discussions and from your well thought out questions. I appreciate your time today.
That was Paul Hamilton from KPMG Canada on why putting human intelligence at the center of hiring is key to building stronger teams. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to Hiring Excellence and share it with a colleague. Connect with Paul on LinkedIn for more insights. And thanks for listening. I'm Johnny Campbell, and we'll see you next time.